thank you for coming out today. I have with me my wife and two of my three daughters and four of my grandchildren and a son-in-law here, all of which I'm immensely proud of and glad that they could be with me today. 4.5 years ago or actually 5 years ago when I entered the race for the U.S. Senate, one of my biggest concerns for our country was the fact that we were on an unsustainable course. And if you will recall, during that campaign, we said 2012 was going to be a very difficult year for our country. Unfortunately, we were wrong. It came much sooner, and the problems are more severe and more difficult. And the real problems stem from the fact that we don't have leaders that will talk about what the real problems are with our country. Instead, they average the political calculation to do what seems to be in their own personal best interest, but not in the long-term best interest of our country. And the tension between liberty, freedom, and personal responsibility versus government elites has worsened over the last 4.5 years rather than improved. We stand at a crossroads as a country today. And the decision of what we will look like 6 or 10 or 12 years from now is going to be, quite frankly, determined by the decisions that are made in the next 2 or 3 years. Our founders believed in the individual's ability to make decisions for themselves. The idea that liberty promoted genuine ideas and freedom of expression. The idea that an individual given free rein under the rule of law could do much more than what a government elite-controlled system could do. And all we have to do is look at history to see that that's true. The danger in our country today is that we are abandoning the very issues and type of government that made us the greatest nation on earth, gave us the most progress of any nation on earth, and gave us the greatest freedom on earth. That should not be the case. And today we tend to see ourselves ruled out of fear rather than courage. And the problems that face us are all solvable, but only if we quit denying what the real problems are. And the real problems are is the government's outside of its bounds, as outlined by the Constitution. The enumerated powers were very specific, and the 10th Amendment was also very specific in terms of what is not in the purview of the federal government is reserved to the people in the states. So the idea of how we solve our problems is to go back to the basics of personal responsibility, creating and honoring the heritage that was ours, which is making sacrifices today so that we pass on this great and wonderful experiment to our children and our grandchildren. The sacrifice of serving in office is often great and not very often realized by those outside of it. But that sacrifice is greatest on our families. And I have to say how appreciative I am of my wife and kids and grandkids in that regard. I struggle with this decision about whether or not to run. The competing priorities of being a great father and grandfather versus doing what you know in your heart you're called to do. So I have made a decision that I will seek a second and final term in the U.S. Senate. I will do it based on the principles of not ducking what the real issues are, being a spokesman for common sense in the U.S. Senate, and standing up to the political correctness that guides the politicians in this country, and making sure we have the appropriate, legitimate debates on the issues that are in front of this country. That's one of the things that's sorely lacking today, and I do not shun the criticism that comes from standing on the principles that made this country great and ensuring that the generations that follow us can embrace those principles and live in freedom greater than any other freedom anywhere else in the world. I want to make one other comment and then I'll take questions. The greatest danger for us today in this country is not economic. It is the challenge of the rule of law. When we decide that contracts are meaningless, that federal judges can negate contracts, that bondholders have no rights on their contracts, that torts associated with illegal passage into this country should not be considered a violation, we are undermining the greatest strength we have, and that is the confidence that everybody is equal under the law. And when the government is the author of that undermining, it is no longer legitimate, nor should it continue in the way that it is. And so my greatest fear, as we see the subtle changes of undermining this confidence, and the thing that made American exceptionalism so promising and so bright was that everybody knew, and everybody should know, that they can get equal justice under the law. And I'm very concerned about the trend, not only in the federal courts, but also in state courts, where we have decided that judges know better. And it's concerning that we have nominees to the court that think their job is to set policy rather than to interpret in a strict fashion what the rule of law shall be.